My name is Emily Colebrook. Hello, and today I'll be interviewing Ellis Banfield, who's the volunteer coordinator at Stanmore Hospital. Hello, Ellis.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks.
Good. Do you mind if we ask you a couple of questions?
Yep, go for it.
Sure. So, what exactly is your background? What did you do before you became a volunteer coordinator?
Right. In my previous job, I managed volunteers and staff for a large animal charity. I did that for a couple of years. Before that, I was at university reading for a PhD. Before that, I worked a couple of different jobs when I left university for the first time, so a bit of a varied background.
And what did you do in university?
3 different things. My first degree was in English literature. Then I moved into philosophy, and then my PhD was on history of medicine. So quite a varied background, which had no employment benefits whatsoever.
So how long do you plan to be with us for?
I mean, that's a good question. There's a lot of potential here to grow the volunteer service, and there's a lot of scope to develop what the Friends are doing, what the radio station's doing, and what the Trust can do with its own volunteers. So that's not something that's going to happen overnight, so probably hopefully for a good few years.
And obviously you picked this job because it interested you when you went for it, so what exactly do you like the most out of it?
Well, in my previous job I managed staff and volunteers, and it was really the volunteer side of things that really appealed, largely because volunteers come out of choice. You can't make them, if they don't come, there's no kind of, they don't get in trouble, and it's really managing and involving people who really have that passion and commitment. That's the really interesting thing about volunteer management. You get people from so many different backgrounds who have so many different skills and can be used in so many different ways that you have a little bit more flexibility than you do with staff, where you have very specific roles linked to employment contracts, etc., whereas volunteers, it's a lot more fluid and it's a lot more varied. So that was the really big appeal about the job, was to come in where there isn't really a structure and really find all of the different ways that volunteers can be involved.
I mean, do you know if there's any other volunteer coordinators in other hospitals?
Yeah, I've visited, because it's my first time in NHS, I thought it would be a good idea to see what works and what doesn't work. So I've been visiting other trusts that have really good volunteer programs, just to kind of get an idea of what they do and how they do things. I mean, to put it into perspective, a trust which is the same kind of size as here probably would have about 200 to 300 volunteers just for the trust itself, whereas at the moment we've got about 5. And then I know the Friends have got a lot of volunteers, and the radio station is growing its volunteer base, but compared to other trusts we're kind of significantly behind the times. Larger trusts, perhaps that have multi-site, big hospitals, general hospitals, can have sometimes over 1,000 volunteers doing lots of different things. So yes, I mean it's something which all trusts are realising, that volunteers can contribute to the work and the experience of patients, and are really trying to develop what they're doing.
Yeah, because Stanmore's quite a small hospital. It's an independent hospital, so I can see what you mean by there's the lack of volunteers here, whereas other trusts may be a bit bigger, so they've got more volunteers. How do you propose to support the charities that work within the hospital already, like us, the Radio Brockley, the Friends?
I mean, that's something which is an ongoing conversation between myself and the groups that you've mentioned. I mean, one of the big things and one of the big needs was a kind of a central coordination where all of the recruitment processes that charitable groups have to go through when they involve volunteers, someone to really help streamline that process. There are a lot of things that when you volunteer and work in the NHS you have to do by law, by policy, to safeguard patients and other things. So it's really helping us all get onto the same page, and then once we're kind of all where we should be, finding new ideas to push things forward. And that's the great thing about volunteering, is that when it's a business, when it's involving employees, there are so many more hoops you have to jump through, whereas with volunteering, with a charitable project, it's a little bit you need structure and you need drive, but it's a little bit more flexible. So I think that once we've identified some really good new ideas to help drive forward, there's going to be a lot of scope for the Friends and the radio to work with the Trust to really, drive our service.
Good. And with these new ideas, obviously you have to have a volunteer to make the ideas. So what, in your opinion, what makes a good volunteer?
Volunteers are motivated by different things. Some volunteers want to volunteer because they want to get skills that will help them in employment, or they might be looking for a job and want something in the meantime to keep them busy. Some volunteers really like the feeling of giving something back. That's especially true with roles that involve helping people or animals, whatever it is in particular. So it's about finding a way to match the role with that volunteer's motivation, because not all volunteers are going to be suitable for a particular role. So a good volunteer is someone who is motivated by the reasons that suit the role, are enthusiastic and committed as well. Volunteering, requires commitment, as you probably know. It needs to be someone who can make a set amount of time every week to dedicate to it. So there's a lot of different things. Enthusiasm and commitment mostly the most important factors.
Yeah, I must admit myself, I joined to put it on my personal statement for uni, but I've been here nearly 4 years now, so I'm staying.
A lot of universities are actually looking at volunteering more favourably than they are work experience. Work experience is something that I think most 16-year-olds have to do. That's often mandatory. The schools make you do work experience for 2 weeks, but with volunteering, because it's your choice, universities will look at that on your CV, on your application, and say, wow, they've made a 2-3 year commitment, or probably not if you're that age, but a year or two commitment of your own free will. It really helps younger people just kind of present their work ethic and their ability to improve themselves. So there's more and more young people getting involved in volunteering, definitely.
Good. And when you were younger, you maybe listened to a bit of music yourself. So what music did you like?
Growing up, when I was born in the early 80s, so my childhood was very much a childhood of rock and heavy metal. That's kind of been supplemented by quite a broad taste in everything from blues, country music to world music. The song that I've picked for today is very much a song of my old tastes. It's a classic ACDC rock song, and it's something that I still listen to regularly, and hopefully everyone else will like it.
Classic rock and roll song, ACDC, Back in Black. This was Ellis Banfield's favourite song, I believe, well, one of them favourite songs of his childhood, or even today, that is. And we're going back into some more questions as we dove deeper into the volunteer coordinator's life. So how do you envision volunteers assisting patients and staff becoming part of the hospital?
There's lots of different ways. As I mentioned before the song, volunteering allows you to be quite flexible in what kind of roles that you come up with. At the moment, really, I'm working with all of the wards and departments to identify what needs they have and to make sure that they're kind of appropriate roles for volunteers to do. The key is not to kind of duplicate staff roles and fill them with volunteers. That's not good practice. So it's about finding roles which support staff and make an added contribution. So at the moment, we're currently advertising for volunteers to help in our therapy garden. We're looking for volunteers to help out in the Friends shop and on the help desk, and there's going to be a few more vacancies or opportunities that are going to be coming up in the next month or so. And it's really, from a patient impact point of view, it's finding volunteers which can help meet the needs of patients in a way which perhaps staff either don't have the time to do, or it's further down their list of priorities. So other trusts use ward visitors or dining companions, or if they've got a particular type of wards like children's wards, you might have playtime volunteers. So it's really identifying with the wards and departments what their needs are and what would be best suited for volunteers.
And how are you publicising this?
Yep, we've had changes made to the website, so you can now find out more about our volunteering opportunities on the RNOH website. We also use a range of other recruitment websites for volunteering, such as Team London and Do It, where if you search for our organisation, you'll find what our current opportunities are.
And because obviously there's volunteering now, but obviously volunteering about 40 years ago, so there's obviously going to be change throughout those years. So now there's an increase in, now we have to do more CRB checks with volunteers, more mandatory sessions if you're at the hospital, maybe treating us a bit more like we are staff, but we're not getting paid for it, obviously. So do you think that will like stop people coming, or even like kick out, maybe make force other people that have been here for a long time think, oh, I don't like this change, I'm going to leave now?
Yeah, it's a difficult line. I mean, obviously the big thing that's impacted volunteering, especially in healthcare recently, has been the whole Jimmy Savile scandal. And that was really the catalyst to identify the need to at least have minimum assurances of who gets access to hospital premises. I mean, you know, it's from a volunteer management perspective, it is frustrating, because it means if you want to recruit someone, you know that that person is not going to start for at least 6 weeks while all of the paperwork and processes are carried out. So from the institutional's point of view, it can be a somewhat complex and time-consuming process. And obviously from the volunteer's perspective, you fill in application forms, DBS checks, which are the new criminal record checks, and then you have to do certain mandatory training as well. But if you flip it, if you're a patient in a hospital, you know, or you had a relative in a hospital, you would want that assurance that anyone who has access to the ward where your relative or yourself are has been checked out, and not just anyone is being allowed access. So it's a balance. It's about making sure that our patients and staff and other volunteers are kept safe, are protected, and that we know who is doing what on our premises. So the key is not to put so much red tape, as you said, that it puts people off. But hopefully I think people will understand that, you know, working in, or volunteering I should say, in a health service in the NHS is going to come with a little bit of extra requirement, just so we can make sure that we know who's getting access to our patients.
Well, how would you maybe keep I don't know, someone who's waiting for their DBS clearance interested to stay and wait enough for them to actually come and volunteer, because they may just be put off and be bored eventually waiting that they'll leave? Yeah,
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, the average DBS check will probably take 3 to 4 weeks. And in the meantime, you know, the prospective volunteer can be sent induction packs, can be sent information about kind of what's expected of the role, just to give them, you know, a little bit more information about what it is going to be like volunteering from the trust, you know, what the expectations are, and to keep those lines of communication open. But obviously DBS checks are done externally by the Disclosure and Barring Service, so it's not something that we have kind of control over the time it takes to do.
And discussing about roles, like, you know, each charity that's part of this hospital will have different roles. How would you direct people into the right role?
Well, some trusts, their volunteer service department tends to place volunteers. I'm of the opinion that each department is probably best placed to decide, you know, if they had 5 applicants for one volunteer role, who is going to have the skills or going to fit in best to the team. So what we're doing here is, when we have a volunteer role advertised, the applications come into me, I process them from an administrative point of view and pass them over to the departments, who will then interview and select which applicants they want. So when volunteers apply, in majority of times they're applying for a particular role that's caught their attention. So in terms of placement, it would only really apply if we had a general inquiry, which we do get some of, and you've just got to go by what people are interested in. And
do you personally go to places to, like, I don't know, do speeches about like volunteering for the hospital? Have you done that yet?
I haven't done it yet. It is on my to-do list. I mean, I started beginning of December, which unfortunately coincided with the kind of slowdown for Christmas, so a lot of places weren't open, but I do plan to approach schools and colleges to really let people know just what benefits volunteering brings, not just for our patients or the trust, but for the volunteers themselves. And it's a very good way, as you said earlier, about building up your experience and your knowledge and your skills, and it's just kind of making people aware that, yep, we're open for volunteering, get in touch.
And how will you, like, when people volunteer here, like, we want to know how much we're contributing, so how will you measure what we're doing?
Yep, volunteering is something which is in its kind of essence unmeasurable, because you're not talking about salaries, you're not talking about, most of the time, direct correlation between hours and money being brought in, but there are several ways of just tracking that volunteers have had a good impact. So the first one is obviously making a record of how many volunteers you've got and how much time they're each giving. It's not to check up on what volunteers are doing, it's not in any way a disciplinary approach. It's really to just quantify that level of commitment. So for example, you may have 177 hours in a department per month of volunteer time. You can apply a formula to that to give you an idea of what the financial value of that volunteering is, and that's important when you're trying to apply for funding to, for example, if you want to develop your volunteer program further, you want to offer new facilities, you want to start a new project, you need to be able to show that the volunteering is worthwhile. So there is a way of converting volunteering into accrued financial measurement, but that's not all of it. The other option would be to run a questionnaire via patients or service users. Have you had experience with a volunteer since you've been in the trust? Was it a good or bad experience? And really try and get feedback from the people who are affected and impacted by the volunteers' work. So there's a little bit of the kind of quantitative monitoring, which is more for a different audience, and then there's the impact monitoring, which kind of really tells you just how service users are finding volunteers.
Would you maybe, I don't know, put together a questionnaire and give it to maybe volunteers every couple months just to see how they feel they're being treated within the hospital? Like, are they feeling worthwhile for doing what they do? I
think that's definitely a very good idea, and I think that having a volunteer feedback probably every couple of months is a bit too much in terms of processing the answers and the requirements, so it would be something that maybe would be done annually, a volunteer survey, and that would allow me really to see if volunteers generally are happy in their role, if they feel supported by the department in which they're working. And there's so many departments in the trust that it's not going to be easy to keep on top of every single department and how they're involving volunteers. So a feedback questionnaire would at least allow myself to identify which areas are not supporting volunteers in the right way, and it also allows the volunteer services department to really identify which areas could do with improving. From my previous experience, I know one of the big areas that volunteers always feel unhappy about is communication. They don't feel communicated enough about what's going on, they don't feel involved enough, so that would kind of give me the evidence to be able to go to departments or go to whoever it may be and say, you need to communicate better to your volunteers, or you need to invite your volunteers to your team meetings because they've got ideas and things that they need to say. So definitely part of the monitoring will be getting feedback from volunteers about how they're finding it. And also maybe some, like I said, volunteers do feel a bit undervalued sometimes because we don't get paid for what we do, and it's sort of, people may just look at it like, you're not really worth it, and they might become a bit more like demoralised in their position. How do you feel that this could be best managed, that you make most volunteers feel they actually are doing something good? Like, obviously we just discussed about checking them annually, but maybe, I don't know, see how they do every monthly. Like, how would you organise things to keep them feel a bit better? Yeah, I mean, that's the question about motivation, really. I mean, if you volunteer because you really want to make the difference in the lives of patients, and your volunteer role has ended up with you filling envelopes in the back room, you're going to be unhappy in your role because that's not what you expected. So part of it is making sure that volunteer roles and volunteers who are applying for them are doing it for the right reasons, and it is the right role for them. If it isn't the right role for them, then they need to feel like they can approach someone and say, I'm not really happy with what I'm doing. So part of that's my job as the volunteer service coordinator. I'll be there for any volunteer within the trust to come and talk to if they've got difficulties, if they want to raise any issues, if they've got any concerns. They can come and talk to me. the plan is for the trust departments is that volunteers have a designated supervisor in each department who is responsible for those volunteers. So that's showing them around, showing them where all the facilities are, going through standard processes, but also to have regular catch-ups to say, are you still enjoying it? You know, is there anything that we can do to make your volunteering more enjoyable? Sometimes you have volunteers who do something for 6 months and they're so good at what they do, their role can be expanded to include more things, but you don't find that out unless they're having those regular conversations. So it's a combination of my job, and each department who involves volunteers takes on that responsibility to actually work and support and supervise them.
So is this all of this just you? Do you have no one else working alongside with you within the volunteering, like, coordinator role, I guess?
No, it is just me. It's a new position. As I said at the beginning, the trust doesn't have a volunteer program yet. My role is to grow it and to manage it, and as I said, with the monitoring side of it, part of what you use the information that you get from monitoring volunteer activities is the ammunition to go and say, well, look, we're contributing this financial equivalent of value each year. In my previous role, I managed 54, I think, volunteers, and I worked out that in a year they were worth about 60 to 70,000 pounds. So you can imagine if you had 200, 250 volunteers to be able to say, this is the value of our volunteering service, this is the feedback from patients, we need more facilities, we need another member of staff, or we need something else. So keeping track and keeping the monitoring side of it going may sound and seem a little bit excessive, but it really allows you to accumulate the information to make a good argument for further investment in volunteering, which is what it needs.
And with all this work, obviously you've got your own spare time, so what do you like to do in your time off, obviously?
My time off often involves me walking my dog, and I like to walk outside a lot. I live in Northamptonshire in a small rural village, so there's lots of outdoor walks, so any excuse to get out there. I have quite a large interest in music. I've got a large music collection, and I try and play guitar when I can, but mostly it's keeping active, being outdoors, and like I said, spending a lot of time with my dog.
Well, you could always come join the Buttercup Walk here at the radio. Oh, not the radio, at the hospital.
Yep, I'm looking forward to that. I think it's the 28th of June this year.
Yeah, this year will be the 28th of June. So.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a really good one too.
So thank you very much, Ellis, for your interview today. We've really enjoyed having you here. How can anyone get in contact with you if they have an interest in volunteering for the Trust?
If they want to volunteer or they want to find out more information, we have a website which has got all of our contact details on. They're more than welcome to email me. The email address is volunteering, all one word, at rnoh.nhs.uk, or if they speak to someone on the wards, and they can pass on a message to me and with their contact details, and I'll get in touch with them.
Right, good. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
When you leave hospital, you may be able to help us. The RNOH Patients Group is an independent voluntary team made up of ex-patients, ex-staff and interested members of the public. We help ensure standards are met by doing inspections of wards and other areas, as well as attending specialist group meetings. If you have some time available during the week, then you may be the ideal person. No previous experience is necessary. You will need to be able to get to the site and have access to a PC and email so that you can draft reports and keep in touch with what's going on. We conduct most of our business during normal working hours, including our monthly team meeting. If you think you can help or are interested in knowing more, then please contact Kim Harris on 020 8909 5717 or email kim.harris@rnoh.nhs.uk.
This is Radio Brockley.
Certainly is Radio Brockley, and before that you heard that really interesting interview with Ellis Banfield, and a big thanks to our reporter Emily Colebrook for that as well. Let me just run past a couple of contact details again for you, just in case you're interested in getting involved in volunteering here at the RNOH. We'd love to have you on board with us. The email address then is volunteering@rnoh.nhs.uk. That's volunteering@rnoh.nhs.uk. If you want to contact us directly here at Radio Brockley, if you want to get involved in the hospital radio, then you can call us on extension 5483, or you can look at our website, which is at radiobrockley.org. And of course, you can look at the hospital's website if you want to find out more about some of the other opportunities available here in the hospital. Don't forget, you can listen again to Brockley News by following the links from our website at radiobrockley.org. Plus, you can hear us Mondays to Fridays for Brockley News Extra at midday for another chance to hear some of our recent interviews, and also on Monday nights at 8 o'clock as well, and you'll get to hear our recent interview with the Chief Executive, Rob Hurd. Up next on Radio Brockley, it is Bedside Bingo, your chance to win some Radio Brockley goodies, so good luck if you're playing along. Hopefully the patient reps will be with you very shortly, if they're not there already. And at 8 o'clock tonight, it's all your favourite tunes for a whole hour. It's the Sunday Request Show. Brockley News returns at the same time next Sunday. From me, Alan Joyce, though. Good night.